Welcome everyone to another episode of Archetype Review. So this time around we're going to be looking at the Penguin archetype. Honestly, this archetype has for a while been kind of an interesting thing, especially back in 2011 in Generation Force when the Penguins actually finally became an archetype because they got their support. The first thing I'll mention about the Penguin archetype is the fact that even though they're an archetype, it's important to note that they're not exactly capable of actually forming a formidable deck on their own. This is because in the end, if you add up every single Penguin card together, you will have a massive 10 cards in the archetype. This is ultimately why it's incredibly important to be utilizing Penguins alongside other archetype series or even some nifty staple cards. Despite talking about Penguins in this video, I'm also going to be talking about a few other cards near the end that actually combine fairly well with Penguins to actually make a solid deck. Penguins have never been and possibly never will be an actual solid archetype. One of the biggest reasons is because, well, there's actually not a lot of Penguins, and the second thing is that they focus primarily on this mechanic called bouncing, which basically means sending opponents' monsters from the field to the hand. Despite that being a big gimmick of them, it's also not really consistent among many Penguins. The other thing is that some of these Penguins are actually pure trash. They really are. Alright, so let's go ahead and explore this lackluster archetype that I keep talking about. The very first set in the series that introduced Penguins is a set known as Spell Ruler that came out back in September 16th, 2002. Spell Ruler is a booster pack that was known as Magic Ruler back when it first came out, although since then it's been known as Spell Ruler. So this set had one Penguin card. The only card from Spell Ruler is a card known as Penguin Knight. It is a water level 3 aqua monster with 900 attack and 800 defense. Its effect says, when this card is sent directly from your deck to the graveyard by an effect of a card controlled by your opponent, unite your graveyard cards and your own deck, shuffle them, and form a new deck. First of all, I should say that the wordage of this card is honestly a little bit funny because it says unite your graveyard cards and your own deck. But to be honest, it's because the last version of this card was released in Dark Beginnings back in 2004. Still, the card obviously hasn't had updated words on it. So being the first Penguin card ever released, especially being extremely early in the days of Yu-Gi-Oh back in 2002, you can obviously see that this card is not very good. The effect was able to stop a few annoying effects back in the day such as mill decks, but overall, there's nothing really special about that. The other thing is that this effect actually says that it must be by an effect of a card controlled by your opponent, meaning you cannot abuse this effect on your own. It would be a little bit different if you actually could. It still wouldn't be an amazing card, but regardless, you can't really combine this Penguin with other Penguin cards in your deck anyway, so no. The next card that came out in a set known as Promotional Cards 1, being promotional cards for the McDonald's cards that actually came out in December 20th, 2002. Hey, that's my birthday, December 20th. Anyway, this was a rather interesting set, but nothing really fancy came out from this whole set here. So Flying Penguin is a water level 4 aqua monster with 1200 attack and 1000 defense. As you can see, it's a normal monster that says a very rare penguin that takes to the air with ears shaped like wings. Well, it's not a good card even back then, it still isn't. There's really nothing you can do about this card being a very vanilla monster with very, very weak attack. If anything, it works well with Rescue Rabbit if you really wanted to use those penguins for this archetype, but aside from that, there's really nothing. But regardless, it's a penguin card, so I have to mention it in this video, but overall, I would avoid this. The next set is Starter Deck Joey. This is actually not a booster pack, but it is in fact a deck. So this came out on March 30th, 2003, and it introduced some rather interesting cards, but among them was one penguin. So the only penguin from this set is Penguin Soldier, a water level 2 aqua monster with 750 attack and 500 defense. Its effect says flip. You can target up to 2 monsters on the field, return those targets to the hand. So for the longest time, Penguin Soldier was actually a very solid and formidable card, usually combined with a lot of other decks like flip effect decks, bouncing decks, even regular beatdown decks back in the day because its effect was honestly fantastic back in the day. If an opponent attacked with their onslaught of monsters, Penguin Soldier would just be able to remove 2 of those by bouncing them back. If you flip it yourself, you get to choose 2 of your opponents, or maybe 1 of your own and 1 of your opponents, or even Penguin Soldier itself if you actually wanted to bounce it too. This card was honestly a perfect definition of flexibility for a card, especially for a flip effect monster, because even back in the old days, a lot of flip effect monsters were honestly trash. This one, however, was clearly not. Nowadays the card has aged a lot, specifically because it is a flip effect monster. Regardless, it's not a horrible card and probably never will be a horrible card unless the game is actually power crap to the point where one day there's a card that says you can target up to 3 monsters on the field. The next set is Rise of Destiny, a booster pack that came out in December 1st, 2004, about a year and a half after Penguin Soldier was released. So the one card in the set is Nightmare Penguin. It is a water level 4 aqua monster with 900 attack and 1800 defense, and its effect says all face-up water monsters you control gain 200 attack. When this card is flipped face-up, target one card your opponent controls, return that target to the hand. So the card was actually decent when it came out, as it's not horrible compared to other trash monsters that came out in 2004, because it does buff up your waters by a little bit, 200 attack, not so bad. And it can also target one card your opponent controls and bounce it. 1800 defense as well. Technically a flip monster, not actually a flip effect monster, but it's very similar. Very similar to Penguin Soldier in many ways, and overall, pretty solid actually. Once again, nobody in their right mind would actually use this nowadays unless you wanted to make a fun penguin deck for whatever reason, which you could, but I'm not going to tell you that you're ever going to win with these kinds of cards, of course. Following Nightmare Penguin, we did not receive another penguin monster for approximately 7 years, in a set known as Generation Force, which came out on August 16, 2011 and introduced one new penguin monster. So the one new monster is the Great Emperor Penguin. It's a water level 5 aqua monster with 1800 attack and 1500 defense, and its effect says, you can tribute this card, special summon up to 2 penguin monsters from your deck, except the Great Emperor Penguin. So this exact date is when penguins officially became an archetype, because, well, it says penguin in the effect, thus penguins finally had their support. So this card would actually be pretty decent if it did not say except the Great Emperor Penguin, because what you could essentially do is just simply tribute one of these, special summon one Great Emperor Penguin and one other monster, and then do it again for the third copy of it, and so on and so forth. With that, this card will probably find itself in the semi-limited list, just so that players don't actually abuse its effect to great measures. Because to be fair, it is a level 5 monster, which means it's pretty shit. Its stats are horrible for level 5, which means you have to find an actual way to put this card on the field without attributing, which can sometimes be difficult, especially using an archetype as bad as this one. The next set, which came out in November 9th, 2012, is Abyss Rising. Like any set before this one, it introduced one new penguin monster. So the one and only card it introduced is known as Puny Penguin. It's a water level 1 aqua monster with 400 attack and 400 defense. And its effect says, when this card is sent from the field to the graveyard after being flipped face up, target one penguin monster in your graveyard, except Puny Penguin. Special summon that target in face up attack position or face on defense position. I'm not gonna really boast about this one that much, and the biggest reason why is because in order to utilize the effect, you must set it face down, and somehow it needs to be flipped face up and then sent to the graveyard. If this effect said only when it's sent from the field to the graveyard without that whole flip face up part, it would be fairly decent, I'll say. It would essentially make it a decent floater in many cases, but the fact that it doesn't do that, it's a little too slow. The next set that follows is Primal Origin. This is the first set in the entire history of the Penguin archetype that actually introduced 2 cards to the Penguin archetype. The set came out in May 16, 2014, so approximately a year and a half after Abyss Rising, so let's take a look at this. The first one is NOPENGUIN. It's a water level 3 aqua monster with 1600 attack and 100 defense, and its effect says, during either player's turn, when an effect of a penguin monster is activated, special summon this card from your graveyard. You can only use this effect of NOPENGUIN once per turn. If a card would be returned from the field to the hand by the effect of a penguin card, banish it instead. NOPENGUIN is a card that actually synergizes fairly effectively with the penguin archetype. It has a quick effect graveyard effect, which first of all is really useful. In addition, because a lot of penguin monsters have the bouncing effect, if this card is on the field, well, it'll banish them instead, which just makes it overall better. If you are going to be running a penguin deck, this card does synergize well, so yeah, I would advise running this card. And the second card in the set is Bolt Penguin. It's a water level 3 thunder monster with 1100 attack and 800 defense. And it's a normal monster, so its flavor text says, with each arm forming an electric whip, this monster paralyzes its enemies and electric shocks. So this is one of the worst penguin cards, even worse than Flying Penguin in many ways, simply because, well, as you can see, it's a thunder monster. Despite it being a normal monster and being already pure trash like Flying Penguin, this one's even worse because of the fact that it's not an aqua type. Obviously, it's a big no. The next set is Fusion Enforcers that came out in February 24th, 2017, so once again another 3 or so years without a release of a Penguin card. So the one and only card of the set is FLUFFAL Penguin. It's a water level 4 fairy monster with 1600 attack and 1100 defense. And its effect says, during your main phase you can special summon one FLUFFAL monster from your hand, except FLUFFAL Penguin. This effect can only be used once while this card is face up on the field. If this card is sent to the graveyard as a fusion material for a fusion summon of a frightful fusion monster, you can draw 2 cards, then discard 1 card. You can only use this effect of FLUFFAL Penguin once per turn. Alright, so anybody looking for some Penguin support will look at this card and be like, what the fuck is going on in this effect? Well, there's a simple answer. There's another archetype known as FLUFFAL, which is significantly much better than Penguins. Despite this card having Penguin in its card name, thus forcing me to actually mention it in this video, it's more so synergized with FLUFFALs as opposed to Penguins. It's a pretty solid card, but I'm not going to talk about anything about this card right now because, well, when the day comes when I do FLUFFALs for a video, that's when I'll actually highlight this card a lot more. But what's actually sad is that despite it having no synergy, it at least has better stats than Flying Penguin and Bolt Penguin, so it's actually better. But the big downside is it's a fairy monster, which means it's not an aqua like many penguins, so it doesn't synergize with support cards. There is that problem, so pick your poison, but not really good. And the last set with Penguin support is Duelist Saga. It's a set that came out in March 31st, 2017. So the one and only card is Guard Penguin. It's a water level 4 winged beast monster with 0 attack and 1200 defense. And its effect says, when you take damage from a card effect, except during the damage step, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, gain life points equal to the damage you took. So this card is another penguin that, despite it being in the penguin archetype, doesn't exactly synergize well with the archetype. The reason why, it doesn't actually have anything in its effect that supports specifically penguins, and its second problem is that it's a winged beast and not an aqua type. The card stats are also really bad, but at the very least it's actually technically a hand trap because you can use it from your hand, thus it being a quick effect, so not a very good card for the archetype. And that right there is actually the entire penguin archetype. Yeah, so as you can see, the penguin archetype is not necessarily anything to brag about because, well, there's only 10 monsters in the archetype. The other thing you'll probably notice is that there's absolutely no spells, traps, or extra deck monsters in the archetype, which is another huge problem and limitation to the archetype. Ultimately, it becomes very obvious that penguins do in fact need to be utilized in combination with other archetypes or support cards to actually make a formidable deck, because them by themselves, they're never going to get anywhere. Although a few cards are pretty decent at bouncing and supporting each other, the attack stat is just far too low in many cases, and there's not enough synergy in the archetype to actually utilize good combos and play extenders. Just to mention a few cards that might support penguins in a decent way at least, would be possibly Book of Moon, Salvage, Shallow Grave, Water Hazard, and even Mori of Greed. A lot of these cards either provide support to flip effect monsters or to water/aqua monsters, which is of course a big positive for penguins. In addition, cards like Spiritual Water ROA or Abyss Soldier might be fairly decent. As far as extra deck monster support, Bahamut Shark is always nice, as such Abyss Dweller, plus number 32 Shark Drake, number 47 Nightmare Shark, and number C32 Shark Drake Vase. Despite all these recommendations, you can kind of see that I'm fishing here for something because the archetype is not going to be formidable by any means, even with all these support cards. The deck is fun to play, but you are never going to get anywhere further than just casual play with your friends with this type of deck. Regardless, it's an archetype, thus I wanted to mention it, but that's honestly about it for the penguin archetype. Alright, so let me know what you think of this archetype and any further recommendations, or once again things that you disagree with, because I'm always looking for that. In addition, keep commenting and letting me know what you actually think about this whole archetype review series that I'm focusing on. Maybe some overall suggestions on things I should tweak, add, remove, and so on and so forth. Alright, so hopefully you enjoyed this video, and as always, please be sure to leave a like and comment on anything that you'd like to. So, I will see you all in the next episode. Bye bye everyone, have a great and a fantastic day.